Hello everybody, and welcome to History Bite number 44, dated September 18th, 2020. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History Bite is entitled Coleman versus Miller, 307 U.S. 433, 1939. Coleman v. Miller was a U.S. Supreme Court decision based on Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. That article, of course, deals with the proposing and ratification of U.S. constitutional amendments. In the Coleman v. Miller case, the principle of congressional supremacy over proposed constitutional amendments and their ratification was set in stone, okay? Specifically, in this case, the court addressed two questions: whether or not an amendment that did not have an expiration date was still valid after several years of essentially sitting out there, and number two, whether or not the courts had the authority to decide whether or not the amendment had been validly ratified by the state in question. Okay, so in Coleman v. Miller, the state of Kansas initially rejected the 1924 Child Labor Amendment in 1925. 12 years later, the state essentially changed its mind and ratified the amendment in 1937. Members of the Kansas state legislature who were opposed to this amendment challenged the validity of the ratification, okay? Some contending that the amendment was essentially no longer in force, okay? As it had been sitting out there for several years and was no longer an active amendment awaiting ratification, okay? So the court ruled in a 7-2 decision by Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes, first, that these essentially were political questions, all right, that were up to the Congress to deal with and decide. This was a political subject. These were political issues, not judicial, not justiciable ones for courts of law to decide, okay? He added, however, that proposed constitutional amendments that do not have an expiration date are considered pending indefinitely, okay? That is, until those amendments are either ratified or withdrawn by the Congress. Those are the only two options to inhibit that pending status, okay? And number two, that Congress, okay, alone, not the courts, has the authority to decide whether or not an amendment has been validly ratified, okay? So like I said, this decision emphasized that Congress, okay, being that it is the political body in question here, dealing with the proposing of U.S. constitutional amendments, Congress has the authority to decide whether or not it wants to set a deadline on amendments, and if it doesn't, then those amendments sit out there forever until they're ratified or withdrawn, okay? And number two, as the political body here, okay, they decide whether or not an amendment has been validly ratified, not the courts. Like I said, this is based on the political question doctrine. These were political questions to be decided by a political body, in this case the Congress, not judicial or justiciable questions to be decided by a court of law, in this case the Supreme Court of the United States. Okay, so that's the summary of Coleman versus Miller. If you have any questions, controversies, or whatnot, leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks for listening to this History Bite. Take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next one. Peace.